everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar, How to Decarbonize Your Fleet, Understanding the Why and How for UK Fleets. My name is Mary Ellen Kennedy, and I'll be moderating for today's presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second, but first I would like to say that we are very excited to have Nick Bridle and Simon West Oliver with us as presenters today. During today's presentation, Simon is going to walk us through an industry update, including an in-depth look at the state of sustainability in the UK and some key drivers for change. And then we're going to take a look at types of electric vehicles so you can better understand which might be the best for your unique fleet needs. And then Nick is going to show us how data and technology can help truly decarbonize your fleet. So before I pass things over to Simon, I just want to give everybody a quick heads up. The microphones have been muted. So if any of you have questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the WebEx chat tool. You should also see the chat icon located on your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool. Please feel free to use the WebEx chat tool and enter any questions you have about the presentation. Make sure you send them to host, that's me, and I'll be happy to field and relay them to our presenters at the conclusion of the presentation for a brief Q&A session. So with that said, I think we are ready to get started.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. It's a pleasure to be here. This is Simon West Oliver speaking. Can we move on to my first slide? I just wanted to share with everybody. This came out from the government. It really is this 10 points of what they view as being the new green industrial revolution. It's a very high level. The depth that needs granularity that needs to go underneath these various areas will really define what happens to that real drive to pure carbon neutrality, as I like to call it today. The area that's really what we want to concentrate on is that area of number 4, which is that accelerating and shifting to alternative fuel vehicles, and the impact that has on you as a fleet operator going forward. I want to spend a little time as well about looking at this holistically and the impacts that are happening already, and the predictive impacts we're starting to see happening. What was started off as a very slow drift is now really gaining some momentum. Next slide, please, Mariella. So here's a few interesting points. And this came out from Telekom Deutschland a while ago. It is a European view, but it is quite interesting. We're expecting to see a peak of cars by 25, and then to start to see a steady decline. Now, this is across the whole of Europe. What we are actually starting to see is that dramatic increase to the search for vehicles with alternative fueling capabilities, moving away from fossil fuel vehicles, and that is really starting to gain momentum. Partly driven by declining usage post-pandemic, but also really defined by Joe Public, okay, the ordinary operator of the vehicle, starting to get on board with the concept of we have a time limit. But the impact has also started to see it arrive with the OEMs, because they're realizing that as we start to move into these different fuel type sources, especially EVs, their after-sales opportunities for spare components is going to start to change, and it's going to start to drop quite dramatically. We're also starting to see that change in advanced driver assistance systems, this drift to autonomous driving vehicles. And it is the cost of these types of solutions that have been inhibited their future development. But that's starting to decrease. It's also the infrastructure starting to change that could support that type of vehicle. And this is really starting to push that change from ownership to usership. So we'll start to see the industry, the automotive industry, start to embrace different channels to market. And that will have an impact right across how fleets are operated. So if you look at the drive for that, that's got to be driven by technology, by the digitization of the whole network. It's not just the digitization of the supply chain, it's the digitization of the operational change. The fleet industry, without a doubt, in the next 20 years, is probably going to see some of the most drastic changes it's ever seen. And it's their time now to respond. It really is important. Next slide, Miriam. So, as you probably got from what I was saying, the next big power driver, it's not horsepower, it's going to be computing power. Because what controls all of this is how we manage data and how data empowers us, not just to run our operations, but start to make critical decisions about our business. And if we're really going to get to that net neutral target, listening to the data and using the data to drive that change is going to be all important. For the manufacturers, it will start to have an impact, because it's not going to be horsepower anymore that drives their vehicles. They need to get aligned with understanding it's going to be data power and how vehicles and assets move through an holistic supply chain. Next slide, please. So I viewed this as some time ago, and I looked at it and said, there's got to be some core pillars for sustainability. The change from usership, from ownership to usership, will definitely increase. As we as private individuals and as business operators start to realise, post the COVID issues that we've had, that we don't need to have that asset all the time. We only need to use that asset for a select period of time. Do we really need to own it? How do we utilise it differently going forward? That is going to drive that real core first level of decarbonisation. But decarbonisation is, as I said earlier on, is an holistic thing. It's not just about the assets. It's not just about how we run them. It's not just how we manage them. It's how they fit into the rest of our decarbonisation plan as organisations. I mentioned that digitalisation across the value chain. It is absolutely critical that we make the speed of movement of data drive our assets going forward, and start to embrace the pure concept of a circular economy. But whatever we've got out there is going to have has to have a longevity in the marketplace, and has to have the ability that it is part of a recycling process. It is not part of a scrappage process. That recycling process defines us using less raw materials, reconstituting raw materials better, and the fleet industry has to embrace that. If we're going to maintain any level of environmental stability going forward. What we are seeing is that social compliance is starting to happen. Individuals are starting to look at this from a personal perspective as well as a business perspective. And when those two cultures combine, we start to get this true concept of cultural acceptance. We are responsible for maintaining this planet going forward. We are responsible for developing the right type of partnerships that allow us to evolve a pure circular economy based on how we manage and use the assets that run our businesses. Next slide, please. So, if you look at what we've done in the UK government Road to Zero report is quite ambitious, and has some distinct clarity. They want to by 2050 to have that zero emissions capability. They're calling to the end of the sale of petrol and diesel, car and van sales by 2030. That doesn't mean those assets aren't going to still be on the road. They are. But what we're seeing now is organisations, especially some of our clients, embrace a policy of change and replacement now. So we will see the decline of those assets completely. By 2035, we're going to see the heavy commercial vehicles up to 26 tonne equally be under the same restrictions. And then by 2040, heavy vehicles above 26 tonne we'll see the same sort of restrictions. So following COP26, which happened earlier this month, there are some sort of key takeaways that are coming out of that. The highlight is that we haven't changed that zero emissions by 2040 and globally by 2035. What we have seen is the commitment of 24 countries, 6 major vehicle manufacturers, not all of them, but 6, get involved into signing up to helping that happen. Some vehicle manufacturers have been criticised about not getting involved. But if you have a look at what some of the manufacturers are doing, they're not putting holistically everything into the EV route. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about that in my next few slides. What we have got a commitment in the UK is this concept of clean air zones. And the government is actually pushing and challenging more and more local authorities to develop clean air zones. This will impact us as individuals and as business operators on how we use vehicles into those areas and what sort of vehicles are going to be capable of operating in those areas. And certainly by 2022, the visibility is that there will be further councils. It's predicted that 20 further councils will have CAS policies operating up in and around the UK. Without a doubt, the ultra-low emissions is going to get extended for the M20 onto the M25 boundary. And that will have an impact on how vehicles, commercial vehicles operate around moving asset and moving services around the UK. You know, it's quite important. If you look at my last note there, it's 20% of vehicles, which is a commercial vehicle factor, that have an 80% impact on the pollution in our cities. So it's not just private car drivers who the focus tends to be heavily aimed at. Okay, we need to get that figure down, and we're now starting to see our clients take this very seriously. The problem here you have is that this involves seriously looking at the huge cost of manoeuvring yourself from an ICE-based fleet operator into becoming a carbon neutral, environmentally orientated fleet operator. Next slide, please. So there is some support that we need to see coming from the government, without a doubt. There seems to be a lack of coordination, and that needs to improve around the clean air zones with a standard that is common across every authority. Without a doubt, I cannot not see us getting away from aggressive motor taxation. Certainly, being an owner of a couple of very expensive old collectible vehicles, I've seen the taxation leap quite dramatically on those assets. And to consideration that I've now started to dispose of some of that fleet. It's a huge move to look at cleaner forms of transport for moving individuals, moving asset, operating businesses across the whole of the UK. And some of our larger clients were actually seeing investment into doing that. The big impact of them is the cost of that transition. But the whole idea, I think, is to eventually encourage fewer and newer vehicles to enable us to operate that mass transport as a service type operation. Next slide. Thank you. So if we're going to do this as a fleet operator, what are our big things that we need to consider? For most fleet managers, the obvious thing is that we're often tied to long-term vehicle procurement contracts. And it's how we manage the demise of those contracts, the change of those contracts, and knowing when it is optimal for both the business and for the operation to do that. For lots of organisations, some of those replacement dates will roll out into the future. They need to take into consideration how those vehicles are funded and if there is some form of contract re-engineering that can go on to help to bring that forward. With the diesel Euro 6 vehicles, at the moment they're still considered as environmentally friendly on large runs. It's only when they start to get into shorter runs that they become an issue. So it's managing perhaps a different type of transport infrastructure based on hub technology going forward. So the residual values that sit with most assets, especially the 4 and 5 trucks, is something that organizations are going to have to look at the impact of that and how they can actually dispose of those assets at the right time to reduce that impact on the business and allow them to fund a change in fleet operations. The other thing to take into consideration, it's not just the things that you've got running out there on the open road. Most organizations, they're often operating large volumes of plant that have an impact because their carbon indicators are sometimes higher than their road operating vehicles. So it's that whole holistic thing I was talking about before. It's not just the things you run on the road, it's how you operate some of the plants that you use internally within your operations. And then today, it really is there a way of improving emissions from the current fuels that we're using today? And I think there's lots of opportunity to really look at that right now. My final point on here is grey fleet versus hire vehicles. A lot of organisations forget the grey fleet operations. They're responsible for that carbon footprint. If that vehicle is being used on behalf of their business, they need to take that into consideration into their total plan. And is it now time to look at some internal subscription model that gets you out of using grey fleet as part of the business and using some form of EV subscription type platforming for those specific type of drivers? Now it'll work for a percentage of that fleet. Then you need to look at how do we keep older vehicles off the road and replace them with newer vehicles, okay? Especially when we're looking at vehicles we don't actually have ownership of. Next slide, please. So my final 2 slides are just to pick up on the 2 points about battery electric vehicles and their strengths and their weaknesses. They are improving and they are getting better. The manufacturers are spending an enormous amount of time in bringing some very interesting vehicles to the marketplace. And we're starting to see the issues around range anxiety starting to decrease. We're starting to see charging infrastructure development starting to appear. There's a lot more of it needed. It was very nice to hear that the government was issuing basically that on all new build properties they should allow for charging infrastructure, but we still have a wealth of the population operating in areas where charging infrastructure is still very, very low. And as an organisation that gets involved in supplying that infrastructure and making sure it's fully digitised and integrated into our full fleet operation, it is essential for us that when an organisation is looking at their decarbonisation strategy, they look at their charging or fueling strategy going forward. Okay, is absolutely essential because that has quite a dramatic impact on both cost of operation and investment for change. Next slide, please. So the alternative, the fuel cell electric vehicle technology is starting to appear. It does offer considerably longer range. Battery tech is smaller, more agile, and there is this operation for exploiting some of the decarbonisation products that around renewable energies, especially things like green hydrogen. It is scalable. We're only just starting to see some appearance of hydrogen tech, cell tech, coming down into the LCVs and the car sector, but it will start to arrive, and it will start to arrive with some pace. For me, I have a biased opinion. I think it's the fuel of the future. But certainly, I think for our commercial vehicle operators, okay, it is the way to look at how you decarbonise some of that HCV operational requirement. That's the end of my presentation. I'll hand over to my colleague Nick. He's going to talk a little bit about how we help organisations decarbonise. Nick.
Thank you, Simon, for that informative update. And I'm just going to now take you through our CAM capital asset management product and how we can help fleet and asset managers forecast out those decarbonisation plans, etc. So before investing in EVs, first off, we need to prepare our fleet data or asset data. How clean is that data? Does it currently exist in spreadsheets or silos? And am I able to provide a report and a number of scenarios with recommendations to the board? And I'll come on to some of that in a minute. Can we all answer the following questions with regard to our fleet data? So we're looking for a strategic capital forecast out for the next 5 to 10 years based on scenarios. Can I create an OPEX forecast? So not only the capital I need to purchase or lease the vehicles, but the OPEX I need to maintain those vehicles by year. We've mentioned CAS, and do some of the national fleet operators or where you travel extensively need to look at when you purchase new vehicles, maybe not put them into certain sites. You may need to move some of those new cleaner vehicles into these clean air zones, so you're not paying the fines, and move some of the not so clean vehicles out elsewhere. It's a consideration. And what is the optimal vehicle replacement time per vehicle by a category? And then we can also look at, should I repair current vehicles or replace with an EV based on a standard financial model? So the necessary data for life cycle cost analysis. So we need to know the capital cost of those assets, the depreciation, service maintenance and repair costs, the downtime that is incurred through maintenance and repairs, looking at the energy and the fuel costs, depreciation, resale value, and the usage, the mileage those vehicles are going to cover. Next slide, please. So what is CAM? CAM is our capital asset management system, and we're managing full life cycles from plan to disposal. So we can procure vehicles through CAM, we can dispose of vehicles, we can do the analytics, and we can do the planning and the budgeting. And we in the center we have a data mart where we will load your fleet details, and we can do that life cycle modeling through that fully integrated product with our maintenance and our fuel systems. Next slide, please. So the data mart in CAM from our fleet focused product, we can bring in maintenance, labour, parts and commercial costs. We can bring in downtime costs, our energy, our uses in our capital, and we can run that information into the CAM system on a regular basis to be able to do the analysis. So what does CAM do? It manages all types of assets, not just fleet. It can manage plant. It can manage the charging infrastructure now. So if you have a project to replace a certain amount of vehicle types in an operational location, you can also use CAM to procure the charging posts and some of that project information, any type of equipment. So it's not just fleet assets. It's the associated plant, the chargers, laptops, anything else you can procure via CAM. So Simon mentioned options for decarbonisation. This is a bit of a busy slide, but on the left-hand side, we mentioned range up to around 200 miles. So for your daily operations, a lot of the plan and the small delivery vehicles, some of the RCVs, the refuse collection vehicles the local authority uses, they're all at low mileage on a daily basis. So those options up to 2022 now are viable for the move from ICE to battery electric. As we move across this slide into the future, Simon mentioned hydrogen. So the hydrogen infrastructure, again, what we call stranded assets, so the coaches and long haul vehicles that customers use, those really are still stranded. There is not the capacity to have the range above 300 miles, and hydrogen will probably play a part in that strategy, as you can run up to 600 miles. What we need to put into place is the infrastructure. And then as the years go on, that strategy will come. So what CAM allows you to do, which I'll show you in a minute, is you can bring a capital forecast together and you can run a number of scenarios. So I could replace all of my light commercial vehicles in the next 2 or 3 years based on range. I may have to run Euro 6 diesels out to 2025 and understand what the hydrogen strategy is going to be. We can run all those scenarios through the product, and you will be able to present a number of strategies, cost, not only with the capital cost, but also with the NOx, the CO2, and the PM2 improvements across the product. So the life cycle model we're going to get into now. And the life cycle model is based on a category. And a category is a type of vehicle, an operational vehicle. It's not a spec, it's not a Ford, a Vauxhall, or a Mercedes. It's more of a light commercial vehicle for deliveries, or it's a heavy commercial vehicle or a 7.5 ton truck. And we look at its operational life cycle to determine when's the best to optimize that. So the first thing we can look at on our life cycle model is our MECE, mean equivalent annual cost by category. And this is really a finance slide where we're looking at the residual value of those assets and the operating costs, the maintenance incurred by year. So in this model, this MECE gives us a 10-year view of that life cycle, and the lowest mean equivalent cost is year 10, with year 8 and 9 within 5% of those costs. Now, having said that, at year 5, some of our customers will look at when the operating costs exceed the depreciation, and that's another consideration on that life cycle. So we can run life cycles by categories, and we can look at the data, the depreciation and maintenance, the downtime and the energy, and we can run a MECE model to determine when is the lowest year and what should that life cycle be. In this analysis, we're looking at the cost trends, and the orange line is the annual usage now overlaid across the depreciation with low, medium, high maintenance costs. And as you would expect, as the vehicles are newer and the drivers like them, the usage is much higher. And as the vehicle gets older, the usage declines, the maintenance starts to pick up, and there are less assets in the fleet. So we're looking at this now based on cost trends and usage of that vehicle type laid across the depreciation. Okay, now we get into the operational view. So if you remember on the MECE model, we said year 10 was the lowest operating cost from a finance view. Now I can look at my pence per mile cost by category. And you'll notice in this slide that after year 7, in years 8, 9, and 10, by year 10, those costs have doubled. So as I said, the utilization of those category of vehicles is reducing. There is less of them as they get older, but they're still coming in for maintenance. So we can look at the MECE model from a finance perspective. We can also look at our pence per mile costs, and we can determine that year 10 on a MECE may not be the most efficient. Maybe a year 7, if I look by pence per mile, on those categories. So I can run those scenarios and we can have an informed debate based on data and technology in the system. From a maintenance perspective, we looked at the capital costs. We have a maintenance forecast and a rate card. And what this rate card does is pick up the costs of this category. These are car-derived vans in this example, and we can model out the labour, either the SMR costs and the non-fair wear and tear costs with the labour hours for every vehicle in that category by year, years 1, 2, 3, and we can identify what the costs are in each of those years, and we can model that out into a workshop budget or a fleet-related budget that supports the capital. So the capital and the depreciation we're going to look at, and now we're looking at the rate card and what the impact is of those operational maintenance costs on this type of category throughout the years. So we're looking at both CapEx and OpEx as we start to forecast out the future. And this is an example. So this is a live example of CAM of battery electric vehicles compared to ICE vehicles. So these are car drive vans. There's nearly 200 vehicles in this model, and this model is in year 4 at the moment. So as you can see, there is a reduction in labour, reduction in parts costs, reduction in standard maintenance and even non-fair wear and tear is reducing for a ICE vehicle. But in summary, there's a 50% reduction in all maintenance, and there's again a 50% reduction in labour hours, 33% reduction in non-fair wear and tear, and the sum of all labour hours is 48%. So roughly between 50% reduction in your maintenance costs. So when we look to move from ICE vehicles to BEV, the capital costs may increase, but the operational costs are likely to halve. And this is a 3-year study, and with battery electric vehicles having 70% less moving parts, we expect these percentages to increase as the vehicle gets older. So significantly in your total cost of ownership, we now know we need more capital, but we can also blend that with the reduction in the downtime and the maintenance costs, etc., etc. And as I said, this is real life data on these exact vehicle types, and this analysis is over 3 years. Okay, so what does that mean for our life cycle? So I mentioned we can forecast out for 10 years. So based on the fact that we could reduce our light commercial vehicles, we may be able to replace some of those light commercial vehicles now. This plan is showing you a tail. In 2020, we have a tail of overdue assets. So in CAM, we identify the life cycle by the category. Every vehicle will have its in-service date or acquisition date, and we can forecast out what the replacement date for all of those assets within the fleet based on age, utilisation, maintenance costs, and the system will work out a plan. And what we try and do then on that plan is take the red line and smooth it. And nearly all the customers I've dealt with have a tail. So they have overdue assets, so they're capital starved, they have overdue assets, and as I explained earlier, the impact of overdue assets is you have increased OpEx or maintenance costs. So if you don't want to replace the vehicles, or you haven't got the capital to replace the vehicles, you need to increase your budgets from OpEx point of view, because you can expect more maintenance. And in this scenario, as I showed you earlier, we may say Euro 6 diesels are clean, and we may need to replace some of our Euro 6 diesels later into or move them up to 2025 to 2030, and then look at what the scenario is for hydrogen or alternative fuels. So what this plan is allowing you to do is run a life cycle and a scenario. In this scenario, we replace the light commercial vehicles and the heavies later. You can run different scenarios, and what's going to pop out is the capital cost to do that every year, and also the OpEx cost, and then we can overlay the CO2 impact, the NOx impact, and the particulates impact as well. So for the first time, you've got the opportunity to forecast out a number of plans and present those to the board for consideration and agreement of that plan. And then you've got the discussion on, if you start with me of CapEx, I need more OpEx, and vice versa. How do we pay for some of these vehicles? Some of them are now twice the price of an ICE vehicle. So all of that will get factored into this forecast scenario in CAM, and you actually have fact that you can present to the board. Okay, now when I take that plan and I break it down by vehicle, this is the actual same plan broken down by individual asset, and you can see the asset registration numbers in blue on the left. There's my category in the middle, and then I can have a plan category next to it. So I can replace this ICE category with this BEV category, and the costs will be more. and that will be reflected in the plan. In the score, we can also take the score of an asset. So all of those maintenance costs in CAM, there's a number of scenarios. And basically, if I've got a number of car drive vans, I've got 100 of them. With the data we have, it will score those assets from 1 to 100 based on a number of scenarios you can choose. So we can go to a workshop manager and ask him his opinion, and another workshop manager may have a different opinion. But this scoring is based on actual facts you set up in the system, either its maintenance cost, its utilization, its life cycle, and basically it's telling you you've got 100 assets. This is the worst score. If you've only got funding for 50, you take from 50 to 100, and you can push those through a replacement plan. But basically, all of this data is being built by asset into that forecast, and then we can replace our ICE vehicles with our battery electric vehicles, and we can look at the impact on the cost and forecast that out. Okay, from a scoring perspective, this is the replacement priority and the forecast chart, the radar chart that will allow you to do that. So we've got 50 calculated metrics to prioritize the assets. We can weight those measures to meet your operational goals. We can score against any level of the asset from category up the hierarchy. And as I said, we normalize the score, 0 best and worst 100. And then we can prioritize those eligible assets as we start to replace those in the plan. Okay, so I hope that's given you an idea of how we can run a decarbonisation plan and look at our CapEx and our OpEx. So in summary, the fleet industry is changing. First major change of this type that we've seen in many, many years. So to succeed with EVs in fleet, we need to gather the specification for the assets and the infrastructure. We need to build that capital forecast for a decarbonisation plan and overlay the impacts of the NOx, the CO2 and the particulates where we can. We can understand the total cost of ownership and all of those elements that are included. We can build EV chargers categories if you want to put your charging infrastructure into that project. And we can build a number of tactical plans for EVs, present those to the board and gain authority for CapEx and OpEx. That basically builds us an infrastructure plan. And the main thing is now we've got some results that we can present to the stakeholders for consideration. Okay, so AssetWorks, CAM and fuel focus. As I said, CAM is a powerful planning tool but requires accurate inputs. Charging costs are unique from organisation to organisation. Only our fuel focus EV product allows actual data to be uploaded in real time and supplemented by asset class, department or individual vehicle. So I hope that's been informative for you. We'd love you to schedule a custom demo at assetworks.co.uk where you can get in touch with us directly and we can give you a bit more time to understand your requirements. We can show you how AssetWorks has a fully integrated suite of fleet products. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Simon. So we're now going to open up the floor for some of your questions. So just a reminder, if you have any questions at this time, please send them to host using the WebEx chat tool on your screen. Provided that we have enough time, I'll pass your question to the presenters and they'll be happy to give you an answer. So Nick and Simon, we did have some questions come through, so I'll just jump right in. So the first one that came in was, can CAM manage the life cycle of EV chargers?
Yes, it can. So an EV charger would be, we'd set a category up for the EV chargers. We could set the life cycle against that category, procure the chargers, bring it into the system, and then run the life cycles against the costs, etc., and predict the replacements. Even if it was just based on age, we could certainly identify those and run those categories and show when those chargers would need replacing, etc.
The question that came through was about gray fleets. So this person, I think they're trying to limit their gray fleet usage. Do you have any tips for reducing gray fleet?
There are a number of sort of ways you can look at reducing grey fleet. For most organisations, you want to look at the types of journeys those grey fleets are actually operating, and to offer them the grey fleet operator either some form of rental platform as an organization, we should be looking at a small EV subscription fleet for those very short journeys. But it is really based on the types of usership that's happening within that grey fleet operation. What has come out of COVID is there's been some pretty interesting reports come about grey fleet usage and the types of journeys that they've been doing. But the whole thing hinges on looking very closely at the types of usage, types of vehicles being used in operating the operation of that grey fleet, and how you get newer, different fuel source type assets into that operation. And as I said, you should be starting to look at some form of internal subscription type modelling.
Could I also add to that, Mary Ellen, that it's a great question. The BVLRA recently published a study that the average grey fleet vehicle is 4 to 5 years old. So it's not only very clean, it's not as safe with the safety measures that are available now. So shifting employees out of grey fleet and into even short-term rental vehicles mean you put them in a cleaner vehicle for the journey, and the vehicle will be much safer as well. So grey fleet is a really the decarbonised grey fleet is an area we would need to work with our customers to focus on.
Both. So it looks like that is all the questions that are coming through. If any more come through, then you can see on the screen here, we have Nick and Simon's email addresses. So please feel free to send them any questions that you might have after this presentation. But in the meantime, great job, everyone. I think that's all the time that we have for today. So at this time, I would like to thank all of you again for taking the time to attend today's presentation. I hope you've all secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. And Nick and Simon, I'd also like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks once again for sharing your expertise with everyone today. As you guys can see, their contact information is available here if you have any follow-up questions. So with that said, I hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to having you with us next time.